is either in a place of paradise or torment. Is what we're talking about serious this morning? To me, it is the most serious of all the topics. Because ultimately, what we're discussing is the eternal destination of our souls and the souls of our children and grandchildren. And in too many cases, folks, we're not getting the job done. I say that with all respect, with humility, but in too many cases, we're not doing the number one job that God has given us. You know, He gives us our children for a very, very short amount of time. In fact, some of you in here, you know, you have a child, you blink a few times, and all of a sudden they're grown. During that time, our job is to raise them and train them in such a way that they'll return back to Him. And yet, as I've shared with you a couple of times already, that's not the case. Current research shows it takes 4 adults to get one faithful Christian in the next generation. In fact, 75% of all children raised in Christian homes who attend public schools will reject the Christian faith by their first year of college. 75%. I don't think this particular congregation is immune to that. In fact, I suspect if you were to take out old picture directories, you guys remember those, and you start flipping back through the years, you're going to notice people, families, young people who they didn't necessarily move away, they just left. This morning, what I want us to do during Bible class is I want us to talk about 7 reasons why we are losing our children and what we can do about it. Now, I recognize there's at least 1 or 2 of you in this room who have a little bit of gray hair. Okay? I realize that. This is one of those lessons that applies to everybody at every stage. Because ultimately, we need to be training up our children, our grandchildren, and ourselves. So let's look at some reasons why we're losing our children. I think the first is probably the most obvious, and that is a lack of Bible knowledge. We don't know the book the way we used to. You know, people used to describe us as Bible-toting, scripture-quoting people. In fact, there is a tradition around my hometown of Franklin, Tennessee, where allegedly a judge could not find a Bible to swear somebody in on, and he asked the crowd, he said, "Is there anybody here from the member of the Church of Christ?" Because he felt like they could put their hand on that person and that would suffice. I don't know that that would be the case today. Hosea put it this way. He said, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." This morning, I want you to ask yourself, can you honestly give a reason of the hope that's in you? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, "Sanctify the Lord God at all your hearts. Be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you, a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear." Let me share with you very quickly a little scenario that happened to me personally. I was teaching a youth class. It was 6th through 12th grade. I asked them some things about the plan of salvation. And here's what I quickly learned. I quickly learned our students have approached Bible study the same way they do their normal school curriculum. That they memorize factoids to be able to regurgitate it back out on a test. And so when I asked them things like the plan of salvation, after a little while, finally people started speaking up and they mentioned things like hearing, believing, repenting, confessing, being baptized. I then asked them this. I said, okay, what's the reason of the hope that's in you? All of a sudden, I heard crickets. They couldn't give me a reason. They couldn't give me an answer because there wasn't that factoid little one-line answer that they were used to. So as you're thinking about that, ask yourself, is your child able to defend their own faith, or are they simply living an inherited faith? Can they actually give a reason of the hope that is in them? Notice 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 15. The Bible says, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Notice that first word says what? Study. So maybe somebody here this morning can help me understand why it is we give our young people a free pass when it comes to Bible study. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, we expect them to do well in algebra or English or calculus, science. In fact, we want them to do really good on the ACT or the SAT. But when it comes to Bible study, they kind of get a free pass. Well, let me remind everybody in this room, myself included, God is not nearly as concerned about an algebra grade as He is whether or not we have instilled His Word into their heart. Study to show thyself approved unto God. Because here's what I know. If those words are not in their heart, then eventually the seeds of doubt are going to grow. Maybe they run off to a movie like Dan Brown had a blockbuster hit a few years ago, Da Vinci Code, where the actors actually made the comment that Jesus' deity was a result of a vote. He had a follow-up movie called Angels and Demons, where he talked about the church having all these little secrets, that we were basically like a cult. So imagine being a 16, 17-year-old child going into a movie like that, or any of today's movies, and having those seeds of doubt planted, running off to college, and eventually those seeds germinate and they grow. So the first reason I think we're losing so many of our kids is a lack of Bible knowledge. Number two is a lack of preparation for combat. Yeah, if your child, your grandchild wanted to join the military, how many of us in this room would, on the day they graduate from high school, put them on a plane and fly them to the front line of Afghanistan? I don't think anybody in this room would do that. Because after all, you would want them to be properly trained. You would want them to have the right equipment, the right armor on. You wouldn't just send them off to battle without any training. And yet, let's be honest for just a moment. How many times do we pack their backpacks, we pack their lunch, we send them off into a culture war that is very real, by the way. And in too many cases, they're not ready. You say, Brad, what are you talking about? A culture war. Well, think with me for just a moment. Many of you in here have heard about Common Core, a curriculum that they're wanting to embrace. What you don't know about Common Core is that the Islamic group CAR, the Center for American and Islamic Relations, they donated $50 million to make sure Common Core was in the textbooks. And in doing so, they bought their way into our kids' textbooks. Our kids are now studying about Islamic holidays, Islamic vocabulary words. In fact, they now dominate many of the textbooks. Or how about this? Maybe your child runs to a bookstore, Barnes & Noble. They walk by an end cap, they see a sign that says thought-provoking, so they stop. Every single one of those books is promoting atheism. By the way, I took that picture. It's in the buckle of the Bible Belt. Or how about this? Maybe they run off to a local museum where they learn that mammals are evolution's latest success. Or they see those alleged missing links that we are supposedly evolved from. You see, there really is a culture war going on. We've talked some already this weekend about the gender neutral movement. It's all out there. Listen to what Paul told the Christians at Ephesus. If you have a Bible, let me encourage you, turn to Ephesians chapter 6. Start looking with me in verse 13, where Paul wrote these words. He said, "Therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, having done all to stand." He says, stand therefore. Church, what we need are young people who are able to stand. No matter what direction the culture is trying to blow them, that they're able to stand because they have their feet on solid ground. By the way, whose armor is it? It's God's. And folks, if you suit your children up in His armor, they will win the battle. When you think about Christianity, when you think about your own personal family, do you view yourself on a cruise ship? And by that, here's what I mean. You know those big luxury liners? I personally have not been on one, okay? But I've been told that some of them are really nice. In fact, I've been told that they've got buffets for miles or open late at night. So you can imagine just being out there on a perfect fall day. About 70 degrees, not a drop of humidity, just like this city in July, right? You've got your favorite Coke in one hand, your favorite magazine, which is Think Magazine, in the other. You're sitting out on that top deck. You don't have a care in the world. You are relaxed. You're comfortable. Is that how you view Christianity? Because, folks, let me tell you something. You better be on a battleship. Satan is real. And he's coming after our children. And if we've got this mentality that Christian life is all about a cruise ship and we're comfortable, then our children are likely to be the next casualties in that battle. Reason number 3 is a lack of protection of our children's hearts and minds. And I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I'm pretty passionate about this one. Remember, Jesus was asked the question, what is the greatest command? Now, before we answer that, let me point out something. If there really is a greatest command, by default, that means there's also a greatest transgression. He was asked, what's the greatest command? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. This is the first and the great commandment. Now, had I greeted each and every one of you as you were coming in this morning and simply asked you, hey, do you love God with your heart and soul? I think everybody in this room would say absolutely. You wouldn't physically be here this morning if you didn't. Well, let's take it one step further. What about your mind? Do you love Him with all of your mind? And before you just nonchalantly shake your head at me and say, oh yeah, Brad, I love Him with all of my mind, ask yourself this morning, what are you allowing into your mind? And what are we allowing into the minds of our children and our grandchildren? The last time I was with you all, I shared with you the fact that many textbooks are filled with evolutionary ideals like this, that you're an animal, you share a common heritage with earthworms. They're teaching our children that we evolved from some bacteria billions of years ago. Over and over again, our kids are filling their minds with this idea that humans evolved from apes. That we're not the product of a creator. We're here by accident. And please, please don't think it's just in science textbooks. It's quite literally in everything. I had a young lady in Alabama come up to me one night. She said, Dr. Harrop, there's evolution in my home economics book. I thought she was kidding me. I said, can you bring it? She did. The next night, I opened it up. First page, first chapter of a home economics book starts out about the evolution of man. In a book on how to bake biscuits, folks. And yet they feel like they've got to tuck evolution into it. And by the way, they're not allowing our children to get old enough to defend themselves. We start now, quite literally, in the very first grade. First grade science book. You open it up, and it starts out teaching the earth has changed much since its formation 4.5 billion years ago. Now, think with me for a minute. That's a 6-year-old child. How many 6-year-old children do you know of that are going to stop and question their textbook? No, instead what they're going to do is they're going to absorb that information, and about 12 years later, they're going to start weighing things, and they're going to realize, you know what? I can't have Bible and evolution too. And for 12 years, what I've really been fed is a whole lot of this. In fact, I've been told that all intelligent people believe evolution, so I'm going to put my allegiance over here. And yet, what did Jesus say was the greatest command? You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. If we're honest with ourselves, for 12 years, what we're doing is we're filling their minds with anti-God sentiment. And I know right now you're saying, no, I've done that. We wouldn't do that. Okay, show me God in the textbooks. Or show me where he is given credit for being the creator, or where he's feared and revered in those textbooks. He's not. He's not allowed. But the attacks on the mind don't just stop in a classroom, do they? What about in our own homes? What are we allowing into our minds, into the minds of our children, within the four walls of our own home? I want to talk to all the men in this room for just a minute. I want you to imagine the following scenario, guys. It's Monday night. You get home about 6 o'clock. You walk into the house, and your wife has fixed your favorite meal. Now, I'm from the South, so that means it's fried, okay? I tell people we even fry our desserts in the South. And by the way, it's not liver, okay? Just saying. About the time you take your chair to sit down, you realize your children are sitting all angelic on a couch just waiting for... Now, I realize this is kind of Norman Rockwell, but go with me for a minute. They're just waiting on you. You sit at the table, and that's the time you realize there is a repairman working on your refrigerator. You knew your refrigerator was about to go down, and you'd called somebody, and there he is. And you realize about every third word out of his mouth is a curse word. In fact, he is cussing the back of your refrigerator up one side and down the other. He is struggling to get the screws loosened, and boy, and there sits your children listening to this guy. How long would you let that guy stay in your house, cussing, blaspheming God in front of your children? And yet, gentlemen, how many times do we walk into that same house Our children are sitting at the same exact couch and they're listening to the same cuss words through a portal we call television. And yet, you know what we do? We justify it. We call it entertainment. Well, dads, let me point out something to you. There may be times in your life where you have to come home, pick up the remote control, and turn off the rubbish. Because again, what did Jesus say was the greatest command? You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. What about that computer? What is it bringing into your home? We talked a little bit yesterday about the epidemic of pornography. Moms and dads in this room, if you have a child who has access to the internet behind closed bedroom doors, you need to rethink that. In fact, I tell parents, you put your computer in the most highly trafficked area with the screen facing outward. You say, why would I do that? Because it's really hard to go to places and have conversations we shouldn't have if people are constantly walking behind you. And here's what always happens. Parents get that dear doe-eye look and they say, oh, but I trust my child. And I'm so glad you do. Let me tell you about another young man that was being trusted. He's a member of Creve Hall Church of Christ in Nashville. By age 16, this young man had already been through the Nashville School of Preaching at age 16. He had memorized more Bible by 16 than most of us will memorize our whole lives. And like most 16-year-olds, this young man checked two things every single day. He checked his email and his social media. One day he was at home checking his email. He didn't recognize one. He clicked on it. It turned out to be a spam email that took him to a porn site. This is a good kid. He clicked out of it. But the seed got planted right up here. And 3 days later, he went back. And then he went back again and again and again. And behind the closed bedroom door with his parents in the house, this young 16-year-old told me he got addicted to internet pornography. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. What about their music? Again, I realize there's some younger people that may not like me much after this, but if I can see their eyes in heaven, it's worth it to me. What are the lyrics that our children are listening to, singing to? And I'll go ahead and tell you, confession time right here. My wife and I grew up in the 80s. We listened to 80s music. And occasionally we'll be driving down the road, we'll put on 80s, and we'll start singing a song, and all of a sudden, with our kids in the back, we'll have one of those, oh no moments. And you guys kind of know what I'm talking about. Oh, I didn't realize that's what they were saying back then. One of those quick change the channel moments. All the while you've been singing something, not even thinking about what they were saying. Well, let me point out to you, it's gotten worse. Because what used to be an innuendo is now very blatant and very in your face. There are song lyrics, I can't even bleep out enough to put them on the screen. They're that bad. Names like Cardi B, Kanye West, and the list goes on and on and on. Jesus said, the greatest command was that we should love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind. What about their friends? If you knew your children were hanging around people that were leading them away from heaven, do you have the backbone to step into that? Because you see, Paul's words are still very valid today. He said, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33. So there's our first three reasons. Lack of Bible knowledge, lack of preparation for combat, lack of protection of our children's hearts and minds. Number 4 is a lack of proper training in the Lord. There are a lot of people who believe the only time spiritual training needs to take place is within the walls of a building just like this one. If that is your approach, let me just gently but firmly tell you, you're probably failing. In fact, let me give you a real quick history lesson. Bible class, as we know it today, it's actually a relatively new thing on the scene. Bible class in the United States of America, less than about 100 years old. And you know when it was first introduced, you know what New Testament Christians said? Don't do it. In fact, there was a massive revolt and protest about it. But there were Christians that said, look, we got orphans out on the streets. We got young people in big cities, young kids who can't read, they're illiterate, they don't know the Bible, they don't have parents training them. It's our responsibility. So they came up with Bible class. Bring the orphans in, bring the illiterate children in. And then pretty soon, you know what started happening? Members started bringing their children. And then pretty soon, the orphans and the illiterate got forgotten. And the members began relying on the church to do the job that God commanded them. You want to know why originally there was a revolt or a protest about Bible class? It was because people feared that if we did it here, it would become like welfare. And parents wouldn't do the job God commanded. Fast forward 100 years. They're right. When you think about that word Christian, is it a noun or a verb? And by that I mean, is it a label that you're wearing on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night? Or is it the life you're living 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Because folks, if it's a label that you put on Sunday morning, your children can see right through that. It's got to be a life that we're living, training them throughout the day. Yesterday we talked about Deuteronomy chapter 6. The Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one God, verse 4. It then begins this long set of instructions. It says, look, you want faithful children? There's only 4 times when you need to talk to your children about God. That's all, just 4. When you lay down, when you wake up, when you're sitting, when you're walking. That's it. That's all you got to do. And yet, the sad part is, in too many homes, we're not talking to our children any of those times about God. We'll talk about sports, Friday Night Lights, baby, SEC football, current movies. But when it comes to the thing, too many times we remain silent. I shared with you Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9, and let me bring that back to your attention. Notice the last portion. Teach them to your children and your what? Grandchildren. If I were to ask, do we have any grandparents in this room? I know we do. Are we teaching God to our grandchildren? I fear that somewhere along the way, what we've forgotten is our sole job is really a soul job. Now, please don't get me wrong. I am very thankful for Bible class teachers, okay? In fact, my children this morning will be sitting at the feet of someone or teaching a Bible class. I'm very thankful for them. But please understand, Bible class should be gravy. It ought to be like the icing on the cake, so to speak. It's interesting to me, everywhere I travel in the United States of America, Christians will all admit one thing, and that is America is worse today than it was 50 years ago. We're more immoral, things are kind of going down the drain, and yet, follow me for just a minute. We all agree it's worse, but we're having less home devotionals. Help me understand that one. Are we having devotionals in our home? Number 5 is a lack of proper teaching. Now, some of you right now are like, come on, Brad.